Get that woman out of my house before she steals something." The shout came through the speakerphone so loudly that my wife stopped brushing her teeth. Rachel stood in the bathroom doorway with a toothbrush in one hand and her phone in the other. White foam clung to the corner of her mouth. Her dark hair was still loose from sleep, and she wore the old gray sweatshirt she had owned since college. Nothing about her looked dangerous. Nothing about her looked unlawful. She looked like a tired woman trying to enjoy one quiet Saturday morning at the lake. The dispatcher's voice returned, strained and careful. "Mom, we received a 911 report that a woman named Rachel Merritt is unlawfully occupying a private residence at Lake Pine Estates. The caller says you refused to leave when ordered." Rachel slowly turned her head toward me. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee halfway to my mouth. For 3 long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel spat into the sink, wiped her mouth with a towel and said, "Dean, apparently I'm trespassing in our own home." I knew who had made the call before the dispatcher said the name. Karen Pinebrook, president of the Lake Pine Estates Homeowners Association, owner of a white Lexus, 6 oversized binders, and an opinion about every porch light, mailbox post, flower bed, and human being within 2 miles of the lake. Karen had spent the previous 3 days trying to make Rachel disappear. She had written notices. She had sent emails. She had photographed our trash cans, counted the logs in our firewood stack, and accused my wife of unauthorized porch occupancy because Rachel had drunk coffee on the swing for 20 minutes. Now she had called 911. What Karen did not know was that Rachel Merritt was not a frightened renter, a confused guest, or a woman who could be bullied by a clipboard. My wife was the superintendent of the state police. She oversaw more than 2,000 sworn officers. She advised the governor during emergencies. She had spent 26 years building a reputation for patience, discipline, and fairness. She had faced corrupt officials, angry crowds, and men who believed a loud voice was the same thing as authority. And Karen Pinebrook had just used an emergency line to demand that Rachel be removed from her own kitchen before breakfast. Rachel rinsed her toothbrush, placed it in the cup, and looked at me with the calm expression I had learned never to underestimate. "Put on another pot of coffee," she said. "The officers are going to need it. To understand how we arrived at that morning, you have to go back 3 days, to the moment Lake Pine stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a test. We had bought the cabin the previous spring, 2 months after Rachel's appointment became official. The promotion had been the culmination of everything she had worked for, but it came with a cost that no ceremony could hide. Her days began before sunrise. Her phone rang during dinner. Some nights she would sit at the edge of our bed in the dark, still wearing half her uniform, staring at nothing, while the weight of an entire department pressed down on her shoulders. Rachel never complained. That was part of the problem. She carried stress the way old bridges carry weather, quietly, faithfully, until the strain became visible only to those who knew where to look. I saw it in the way she stopped sleeping through the night. I saw it when she read the same paragraph 3 times and could not remember a word. I saw it on mornings when she stood in front of her uniform as though it weighed 100 pounds. So I found the cabin. It sat on the north side of Lake Pine, where the water narrowed between 2 ridges covered in tall pines. The structure was simple: cedar siding, a stone chimney, a deep porch, and a narrow dock reaching into clear water. There were no grand gates, no marble floors, no rooms built to impress strangers. It was quiet. That was its value. The title was held by Merritt Ridge Properties, an LLC I had formed years earlier for a small number of family investments. My name appeared as the managing member. Rachel was listed in the operating agreement as co-manager and beneficiary, but her personal name did not appear in the county's public-facing ownership search. At the time, the arrangement had seemed ordinary and convenient. I did not yet know that Karen Pinebrook would treat a public database like Scripture and everything outside it like a criminal conspiracy. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon with the truck bed full of groceries, fishing gear, 2 folding chairs, a cooler, and enough coffee to survive a week without civilization. The sky was a clean September blue. Sunlight moved across the lake in silver bands. Rachel rolled down her window as we entered the community and breathed in the scent of pine and damp earth. "This," she said, "is exactly what I needed." For the first time in weeks, she looked lighter. We turned onto our gravel drive and parked beside the cabin. Rachel carried the first grocery bags to the porch while I lowered the tailgate. She was humming an old country song when tires crunched behind us. A white Lexus entered our driveway without slowing. The vehicle stopped at an angle that blocked half the road. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses, cream-colored slacks, and a green knit sweater too heavy for the weather. She held a clipboard against her chest like a judge approaching the bench. Karen Pinebrook did not wave. She did not introduce herself. She looked past us and began walking around the cabin. Rachel set the grocery bags down. "Good afternoon. Can we help you?" Karen raised one finger without looking up, the universal gesture of people who believe everyone else can wait. She examined the porch rail. She wrote something. She glanced at our truck and wrote something else. She walked to the edge of the lawn, stared at the dock, and made another note. I stepped forward. "Excuse me, this is private property." That finally made her look at us. "Are you renters?" she asked. "No," Rachel said. "We own the cabin." Karen's mouth tightened. "I don't recognize you." Rachel glanced at me, then back at Karen. "We were here in May. My husband's name is Dean Merritt. I'm Rachel." Karen removed her sunglasses slowly. "I am the president of the Lake Pine Estates Homeowners Association," she said. "All owners and occupants are required to submit an arrival notice through the community portal." The community portal was a broken website that looked as though it had been created when people still mailed compact discs. Half the links did not work. The calendar showed dates from 6 years earlier. The login page rejected correct passwords and accepted incorrect ones at random. Someone had named a document, Final Rish Nash Yest, Nash Na 3. Karen spoke of that portal as if it were a federal border system. "We were never informed that owners had to announce every visit," I said. Karen clicked her pen. "That does not mean the requirement does not exist." Rachel kept her voice pleasant. "Then send us the written rule, and we'll review it." Karen studied her. "I checked the county records this morning. Your name is not listed as an owner." There it was, the first stone in the road. I explained the LLC. I told her I was the managing member. I told her Rachel was my wife and co-manager. I offered to show identification and the operating agreement once we brought the groceries inside. Karen did not want clarification. Clarification would have ended the moment she was enjoying. She reached into a bright red folder and removed a sheet of paper. The notice was printed in large blue letters beneath an HOA logo that looked like a pine tree trapped inside a stop sign. Unververkupend, temporary vacant request. Karen held it toward Rachel. "You must leave the property until the board confirms your status." Rachel looked at the paper, then at Karen. "No." Karen blinked. Rachel picked up the grocery bags again. "I am not leaving my home because you misunderstood a public record. I am giving you an official directive." "No," Rachel said. "You are giving me a piece of paper." Karen's face changed. It was not anger at first. It was disbelief. She had expected resistance to sound nervous. She had expected an explanation, an apology, or a plea for time. What she received was a calm refusal from a woman who did not need Karen's permission to stand on her own porch. Karen lifted her chin. "This community has standards." Rachel met her eyes. "So does the law." For 1 second, the air between them seemed to tighten. Then Karen put on her sunglasses, turned sharply, and walked back to the Lexus. Before getting in, she pointed her pen toward the cabin. "This is not finished." Rachel waited until the car disappeared beyond the trees. Then she looked at me. "She's going to be exhausting, isn't she?" I picked up the cooler. I believe exhausting may be her retirement plan. The first notice arrived before 8 the next morning. It was taped to the front door with enough clear packing tape to survive a hurricane. According to Karen, our yard exceeded the natural debris allowance. The evidence consisted of 4 pine cones and a branch no longer than my forearm. At 10:15, a second notice appeared beneath the windshield wiper of our truck. It warned that our vehicle was parked at an angle inconsistent with neighborhood presentation. At noon, Karen sent an email claiming that Rachel had refused an inspection. No inspection had been scheduled. By 3, she had photographed our recycling bin from 3 different directions. Rachel watched the security footage that evening without speaking. On the screen, Karen moved around the property with a tape measure, pausing to study the distance between our welcome mat and the front door. What could she possibly be measuring? I asked. Her importance, Rachel said. The next morning, Rachel carried coffee to the porch and sat on the swing. The lake was covered in thin mist. She wore jeans, an old blue shirt, and no badge. For 20 peaceful minutes, she listened to the water and watched a pair of ducks move through the reeds. At 9:23, another notice was taped to the mailbox. Excessive porch capacity. I read the words twice. I don't think that is a real violation. It isn't, Rachel said. Do you think she invented it? I think she invented it before breakfast and congratulated herself by 9. Rachel photographed every notice, recorded the date and time, and placed the originals in a folder. She did not call her office. She did not mention her position. She did not ask anyone to intervene. That was not fear or passivity. It was discipline. Rachel had spent her career teaching young officers that authority should never be used to settle personal discomfort. If someone challenged you, embarrassed you, or insulted you, the badge did not become a private weapon. The law was not a hammer to swing at every person who annoyed you. She intended to follow the same standard now. Karen interpreted restraint as weakness. On Saturday morning, we found a formal complaint attached to the mailbox. It accused Rachel of unauthorized cohabitation with a registered owner and ordered the unidentified female to depart within 48 hours. Rachel read it at the kitchen table while I cooked eggs. The complaint claimed she had refused to identify herself, even though she had given Karen her full name on the first day. It claimed she had threatened an HOA official, although the closest thing to a threat had been the sentence. So does the law. It also claimed that Rachel's presence had created an atmosphere of instability among verified residents. I turned from the stove. Do you suppose the verified residents know they're unstable? Rachel did not smile. That got my attention. She placed the complaint beside the other notices and looked toward the window. She isn't trying to enforce a rule, Rachel said. She is trying to create a paper trail that makes her version of events look official. Will it work? Not if anyone checks. But most people do not check until damage has already been done. She tapped the complaint with one finger. She wants me to either leave or lose my temper. If I leave, she believes she won. If I become angry, she will say I proved her right. What are you going to do? Neither. We spent the rest of the day at the dock. Rachel caught 2 small bass and released both. I caught a submerged branch and spent 10 minutes pretending it had fought well. By sunset, the tension had eased from her shoulders. For a few hours, Lake Pine became what we had bought it to be. That night, however, Karen sent an email to the full HOA board. The subject line read, "Urgent public safety concern." She claimed an unidentified woman was occupying our cabin, refusing to comply with community directives, and behaving in an increasingly hostile manner. She asked the board to authorize immediate removal through local law enforcement. One board member replied within minutes, "The woman is married to the owner. What legal authority would we have to remove her?" Karen answered that marriage did not automatically establish approved residency. A second board member asked whether the bylaws required owners to register their spouses. Karen did not answer the question. Instead, she wrote that hesitation would expose the board to liability. Rachel read the thread in silence. "Someone on that board knows she's wrong," I said. "Several of them know. Then why don't they stop her?" Rachel closed the laptop. Because people are often more afraid of an unreasonable person's reaction than they are committed to doing what is reasonable. At 7:30 the next morning, Karen called 911. She told the dispatcher that Rachel was unlawfully inside the cabin, had refused repeated demands to leave, and might become aggressive if confronted. She identified herself as the HOA president and implied that she was speaking on behalf of the property owner. The dispatcher searched the public ownership record. She saw the LLC. She did not see Rachel's name. Because Karen used the words trespass in progress, 2 county deputies were sent to our address. That was the call that reached Rachel while she was brushing her teeth. 22 minutes later, 2 patrol vehicles came through the trees. Their emergency lights were on, but the sirens were silent. Blue reflections moved across the trunks and windows. From the kitchen, they looked strangely beautiful, like cold light passing through a cathedral of pines. Rachel had changed into jeans and a navy sweater. She placed copies of her marriage certificate, the LLC operating agreement, the deed, and her driver's license on the dining table. "You keep those at the cabin?" I asked. "I keep copies of important documents in every property we use." "Of course you do." She glanced at me. "You say that as though organization is a character flaw. It's only intimidating before coffee." The deputies parked near the porch. One was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with gray at his temples and the patient expression of a man who had spent decades listening to neighbors argue about fences. The second looked younger than our dining table. They approached carefully. Rachel opened the door before they knocked. "Good morning," she said. "I understand someone reported that I'm trespassing." The younger deputy checked his notes. "Mom, we received a report of an unauthorized occupant refusing to leave a private residence. Who does the caller believe owns the residence?" He looked down again. "Merritt Ridge Properties. That company belongs to my husband and me. Please come inside." The older deputy raised a hand. "Before we enter, do you have identification?" Rachel handed him her driver's license. He read the name, but no recognition showed on his face. Her position was not printed on the license, and she was dressed like any other homeowner at the lake. Inside, the deputies looked around with quiet professional attention. Fishing rods leaned near the mudroom. 2 coffee mugs sat on the counter. A grocery list was held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like Texas. Rachel's shoes were beneath the bench. Her book lay open on the arm of the sofa. Nothing suggested forced entry. Everything suggested ordinary life. The younger deputy read from his notes. "The complainant says she personally ordered you to vacate and that you refused." "That is true," Rachel said. He paused. Rachel continued. "She ordered me to leave a home I lawfully occupy. I refused." The older deputy's mouth moved slightly, as though he was suppressing a reaction. "Can you establish your connection to the owner?" he asked. Rachel guided them to the dining table. "This is our marriage certificate. This is the operating agreement for Merritt Ridge Properties. You'll see that Dean is the managing member, and I am co-manager, successor manager, and beneficiary. This is a copy of the deed. Here are utility statements addressed to both of us at this property, and this is the insurance declaration page listing us as authorized occupants." The deputies reviewed the papers carefully. The younger one looked relieved. The older one looked tired. "This appears to be a civil misunderstanding," he said. "It stopped being only a misunderstanding when someone knowingly used 911 to report a false emergency," Rachel replied. Her voice was not sharp. That made the words heavier. The younger deputy looked up. His eyes settled on her name again. "Rachel Merritt," he said slowly. "Yes." He looked at the older deputy, then back at Rachel. "Mom, are you Superintendent Merritt?" Rachel gave a small nod. Both men became very still. The younger deputy straightened so quickly that the notebook in his hand nearly fell. The older deputy removed his hat. "Superintendent," he said, "we were not informed." "There was no reason you should have been," Rachel said, "and I do not want either of you apologizing for responding to a call. You arrived, asked appropriate questions, and reviewed the evidence. That is your job." The younger deputy's face remained red. Rachel gestured toward the television. "What I do want is a complete incident report, including the caller's exact statements. I also want you to see something before you leave." She opened the security application and played the footage. Karen appeared on the screen, crossing the boundary marker at the edge of our property. She photographed the windows. She examined the trash bin. She climbed the porch steps and measured the firewood stack. In another clip, she tried the handle of our storage shed. The older deputy leaned forward. "Did you give her permission to be on the property?" "No." "Has she been told to stay off?" "Not formally. I intended to resolve this without escalating it." He watched another clip. "I would recommend a written no trespass notice." "I agree." The younger deputy turned a page in his notebook. "The caller said she was acting on behalf of the legal owner." I stepped closer. "She has never spoken to me about removing Rachel. I would never authorize it." The older deputy sighed. "Then we have a false representation at minimum. Dispatch can preserve the call recording. We'll document everything." Rachel nodded. "I do not want special handling because of my position. Route the report through your normal chain. If a conflict review is required, send it to the county attorney." "Yes, Mom. And please stop calling me Mom as though I'm about to inspect your uniforms." The younger deputy managed a nervous smile. When they left, the older deputy carried a signed no trespass notice for Karen. The younger one had accepted a travel mug of coffee from me and looked grateful for something to hold. I closed the door and turned to Rachel. "Well," I said. "That was uncomfortable. For them, yes. For you?" Rachel looked at the empty road beyond the window. "For me, it was informative." "What did you learn?" She was willing to create a false emergency because a piece of paper did not make me obey her. Rachel gathered the documents and placed them back in their folder. "That means this is not about residency anymore." "What is it about?" "Control." Outside, the blue lights disappeared between the trees. The lake returned to silence. But it was not peaceful silence. It was the kind that comes after a warning bell. By noon, the entire community knew. Lake Pine Estates had fewer than 80 homes, and information traveled there with the speed and accuracy of smoke in a high wind. By lunch, one version of the story said Karen had tried to arrest Rachel herself. Another claimed 6 state troopers had surrounded the clubhouse. A third insisted I was a retired federal judge living under an assumed name. The truth was simpler, and for Karen, much worse. She had called 911 on a lawful resident. 2 county deputies had documented it. Dispatch had preserved the recording, and the resident happened to understand exactly how a false report should be handled. Karen responded with an email. It arrived at 12:47 p.m. and went to every member of the HOA board, every household on the community mailing list, and, for reasons known only to Karen, the company that serviced the clubhouse vending machine. The subject line read, "Clarification, we're regging this morning's SACF event." Karen wrote that she had acted in good faith after encountering an individual whose ownership status remained administratively unresolved. She said law enforcement had been unable to remove Rachel because of conflicting jurisdictional claims. She accused Rachel of using a government title to intimidate local officers and warned residents not to be influenced by political pressure. At the bottom, Karen announced an emergency board meeting for 4 that afternoon. I read the email twice. "She has transformed being wrong into a constitutional crisis," I said. Rachel was already opening a fresh document on her laptop. "What are you writing?" "A notice to my department's ethics council, because she mentioned your title, because this is now a personal dispute in which my public position is known. From this moment forward, I cannot allow anyone under my command to touch it." She wrote a short summary, attached the county incident number, and formally requested that any matter involving Karen, the HOA, or our property be referred outside Rachel's chain of command. She also asked for written guidance limiting her own role. Within an hour, the answer came back. Rachel was not to direct, supervise, or participate in any criminal or administrative investigation arising from the dispute. She could report conduct, preserve evidence, and respond as a private citizen. Oversight would be assigned to the State Inspector General's Public Integrity Unit, which operated independently from her department. Rachel printed the email and placed it in the growing folder. "That," she said, "is how authority is supposed to work." At 3:30, we drove to the clubhouse. It was a low beige building beside the community tennis court, with narrow windows, fluorescent lights, and a carpet patterned to hide decades of coffee stains. Framed photographs of past board presidents lined the hallway. Karen appeared in 4 of them. Rachel entered alone. I waited in the truck because the dispute concerned her status, and she did not want my temper complicating her presentation. Through the open windows, I could hear chairs scraping and voices rising. Karen began before everyone had settled. "This individual has repeatedly refused lawful oversight," she said. "She has manipulated local officers by invoking her government position. We cannot allow one resident to place herself above community standards." A man's voice answered. I recognized Greg Holloway, the HOA treasurer. "She is the owner's wife, Karen. The company documents list her as co-manager." "What exactly are we deciding?" "We are deciding whether rules still mean anything." Another board member, Linda Carver, spoke from across the room. "The bylaws do not require spouses to register separately." Karen's voice sharpened. "The portal requires an occupancy notice." "The portal has not worked since March," Linda said. "That is not the point." It was, of course, exactly the point. Then Rachel spoke. She did not raise her voice. The room quieted anyway. "My name is Rachel Merritt. I am lawfully authorized to occupy the property held by Merritt Ridge Properties. Copies of the deed, LLC agreement, insurance records, and utility records are in the packet before you. I am also married to the managing member, who has provided written confirmation that I reside there with his permission." Paper moved across the table. Rachel continued. "I am not asking this board for a favor. I am asking you to read your own governing documents. There is no rule requiring an owner's spouse to obtain separate approval. There is no rule authorizing the president to order a lawful occupant from private property. There is no rule allowing an officer of this association to represent herself to 911 as the owner's agent when she is not." Karen interrupted. "You frightened those deputies with your title." "I did not disclose my title until one of them recognized my name. I then instructed them to follow ordinary procedure. The report will confirm that." "You expect us to take your word for it?" "No. I expect you to take the recording, the body camera footage, and the documents for it." A long silence followed. Greg cleared his throat. "I move that the board recognize Mrs. Merritt as an authorized occupant and direct the president to cease enforcement related to her residency." Linda seconded the motion. For a moment, I thought the matter was over. Then Karen said, "Anyone voting for that motion accepts personal liability for whatever happens next." It was nonsense, but fear does not require accuracy. 2 board members looked down. Another asked whether the association's attorney should review the issue first. Greg insisted the bylaws were clear. Karen warned that insurance coverage might be affected. Within minutes, certainty dissolved into hesitation. The board postponed the vote for 48 hours. Rachel returned to the truck carrying her folder. "They know she's wrong," I said. "Yes, and they still did nothing. They are waiting for someone else to make courage unnecessary." On the drive home, we passed Karen's Lexus near the clubhouse entrance. She sat behind the wheel, watching us through the windshield. Rachel did not look at her. That evening, our insurance agent called. An anonymous person had reported that the cabin was being used as an unlicensed short-term rental occupied by unrelated individuals. If the report proved true, our policy could be reviewed. I felt anger rise in my chest. Rachel asked the agent for the claim reference number, sent proof of occupancy, and requested that the anonymous report be preserved. The matter was closed before dinner. The next morning, the county zoning office emailed us about a complaint, alleging that we had installed an illegal septic connection and were operating a commercial retreat. We had done neither. A county inspector arrived that afternoon. He looked at the permits, walked around the property, and apologized for the inconvenience. "Someone gave us very specific language," he said. "They knew which form would trigger a visit." Rachel wrote down his name and the complaint number. The following day, the fire marshal received a report that our woodpile blocked emergency access. It did not. Then animal control received a complaint about an aggressive dog. We did not own a dog. Then the electric cooperative received a claim that we had bypassed the meter. We had not. Karen was no longer trying to enforce rules. She was using public systems as a swarm, sending one harmless-looking complaint after another, in the hope that the weight of them would exhaust us. For most people, it might have worked. A missed form could raise an insurance premium. A misunderstood inspection could delay a sale. A frightened employer could react to an anonymous accusation before checking the facts. Bureaucracy could hurt people without anyone ever shouting. That was what made Karen dangerous. She understood that a lie written in an official-looking box often traveled farther than a lie spoken aloud. Rachel answered each complaint with records, dates, and calm precision. But at night, after the laptop closed and the porch light went off, I could see the cost. She checked the road before stepping outside. She listened when gravel shifted. She reviewed the security feed before bed. The cabin was supposed to help her breathe. Karen had turned it into another command post. On Sunday evening, we drove into town for dinner. Rachel ordered grilled trout and barely touched it. I told a long story about a man at the hardware store who had tried to return a ladder after cutting it in half. Usually, she would have laughed. That night, she only smiled politely. "We can go home," I said. "I'm trying not to let her take the whole weekend. She already has." Rachel looked through the restaurant window toward the dark road outside. "Then we take it back tomorrow." We left shortly after 8. When the truck turned into our driveway, the headlights swept across the porch. The front door was open, not wide, only an inch, but we had locked it. Rachel's hand came up, stopping me before I opened my door. "Stay here. You know I'm not doing that." She looked at me once, understood argument would waste time, and reached for her phone. We did not enter. Rachel called the county sheriff's office and reported a possible unlawful entry. Because of the ethics restriction, she identified herself only as the homeowner and gave the prior incident number. We waited in the truck beneath the porch light until 2 deputies arrived. The older deputy from the 911 call was one of them. He walked through the house with his partner while we remained outside. Nothing had been stolen, nothing had been broken. But small things had changed. A framed photograph of Rachel and me had been placed face down on the mantel. A kitchen drawer stood open. The hall closet had been disturbed. In Rachel's office, the drawer where she kept an old ceremonial badge and several personal files had been pulled out 3 inches. The message was unmistakable. Someone wanted us to know they had been inside. The deputies photographed everything. They found no sign of forced entry. "Who has keys?" the older deputy asked. "Only Dean and me," Rachel said. "The HOA maintains emergency access keys for some older properties, but we never provided one." I remembered the closing documents. "The previous owner may have," I said. The deputy looked toward the open door. "We'll ask for the key control log." Rachel's face became very still. Karen had crossed a line that could not be explained by a broken website or a confused bylaw. She had entered our home, or she had enabled someone else to do it. The next morning, the Inspector General's office opened a preliminary review. Rachel did not celebrate. She stood at the kitchen window, looking toward the road. She wanted an official contest, she said. Now she has one. At 6:40 the following morning, a soft mechanical buzzing woke me. At first I thought it was a lawn tool somewhere across the lake. Then the sound moved closer, paused, and rose beside the second-floor bedroom window. A small black drone hovered beyond the glass. Its camera faced directly into the room. I pulled the curtain shut. Rachel was already awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening. "Do not touch it," she said. I had not planned to climb out the window. You were thinking about opening it. I was thinking about many things. Most of them would look terrible in a 10-second video. That was the trap. Karen needed an image more than she needed the truth. A raised fist, a shouted sentence, a man reaching toward a drone, something she could remove from context and attach to a new complaint. Rachel turned on her phone camera and recorded the drone's position. Then she called the county dispatch center, reported an unmanned aircraft hovering outside an occupied bedroom window, and requested an incident number. The drone remained for 3 minutes. Then it moved toward the trees. Our exterior camera captured its flight path. It crossed the community road and descended behind Karen's garage. The footage did not prove who had operated it, but it pointed in a direction investigators could not ignore. By 9, the Inspector General's Public Integrity Unit had requested the HOA's emergency key records, board emails, complaint logs, and vendor contracts. The county attorney separately reviewed the 911 recording. The sheriff's office opened a trespass investigation. None of those offices reported to Rachel. For the first time since Karen appeared in our driveway, the process was beyond both women's control. That mattered. Justice becomes fragile when it depends on the most powerful person in the room. Rachel did not want Karen defeated because Rachel held a higher title. She wanted the facts examined by people who could say no to both of them. Karen had never understood that kind of authority. She arrived at our cabin shortly after noon. A young attorney followed her up the path carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a navy suit that looked new enough to still remember the store. He introduced himself as Stephen Cole, outside counsel retained by the HOA for limited advisory purposes. His voice suggested he had not been told what those purposes involved. Karen held a thick envelope. "This is a formal cease and desist notice," she announced. "You are ordered to stop intimidating community leadership, interfering with official inspections, and making defamatory accusations against the president." Rachel stood inside the open doorway. I remained 2 steps behind her. "Mr. Cole," she said, "have you reviewed the deed, the operating agreement, and the bylaws?" Stephen adjusted his grip on the briefcase. "I reviewed the materials provided by the association. That was not my question." His eyes moved briefly toward Karen. "I have not seen the operating agreement. Have you listened to the 911 recording?" "No." "Have you reviewed the security footage showing Ms. Pinebrook entering our property after being told she lacked permission?" "No." "Have you examined the emergency key log requested by the sheriff's office?" Stephen's expression changed. "What key log?" Karen stepped forward. "That is irrelevant. We are here because of her conduct." Rachel did not look at her. "Mr. Cole, this dispute is under review by the county sheriff, county attorney, and the state inspector general. I am recused from all official involvement because of my position. Any communication should be directed through the investigator listed on this card." She handed him a business card. Stephen read it. Then he looked at the envelope in Karen's hand. "Karen, you told me this was an occupancy dispute." "It is. You did not mention a break-in investigation. There was no break-in." Rachel spoke quietly. "Then the key records will help establish that." Karen's face tightened. The drone buzzed somewhere above the trees. All 4 of us looked up. A moment later, it appeared over the roofline and hovered behind Stephen. He turned, saw it, and went pale. "Is that yours?" he asked Karen. "No." The answer came too quickly. The drone descended toward the Lexus. Stephen followed it with his eyes until it disappeared near the rear of the vehicle. Karen gripped the envelope so hard the paper bent. "This meeting is over," she said. "It never began," Rachel replied. Stephen did not deliver the cease and desist notice. He walked back to the Lexus several feet behind Karen, already speaking into his phone. That afternoon, he sent a letter to the HOA board withdrawing from the matter and advising every member to preserve documents. By sunset, 3 board members had contacted the Inspector General voluntarily. Fear was beginning to change sides. The key log arrived the next day. Lake Pine's emergency access system had been created 20 years earlier, when many owners lived out of state and trusted the board to enter cabins during frozen pipes, fire alarms, or storm damage. Keys were kept in a locked cabinet at the clubhouse. 2 signatures were required for removal. Every use was supposed to be recorded. The system had not been audited in 9 years. Our property's key had been removed at 6:14 p.m. on the night of the unlawful entry and returned at 9:02. The entry contained 1 signature: Karen Pinebrook. The second signature line was blank. Beside reason for access, Karen had written occupancy verification. No emergency had existed. No owner had given permission. No board vote had authorized entry. The Inspector General upgraded the review to a formal investigation. The sheriff's office requested an interview with Karen. The county attorney began examining whether the false 911 call and administrative complaints formed a pattern of intentional misuse. The association's insurance carrier appointed independent counsel. Karen answered with a petition for an emergency civil order, declaring Rachel's a threat to community safety. She filed it without an attorney. The petition was 38 pages long. It included screenshots of Rachel jogging, photographs of our truck, copies of invented violations, and a paragraph describing Rachel's calm tone as professionally menacing. Karen claimed that Rachel's position made every disagreement inherently coercive. That argument might have deserved consideration if Rachel had used her office against Karen. The ethics records showed the opposite. Rachel had reported the conflict, recused herself, requested outside oversight, and followed ordinary channels. Her restraint became the strongest answer to Karen's accusation. A county judge denied the emergency request the same day. He referred the filing to the existing investigation because several statements conflicted with recorded evidence. The following morning, 2 dark state vehicles entered Lake Pine Estates. There were no sirens and no flashing lights. They did not need either. 4 investigators went first to the clubhouse. They secured the key cabinet, copied the association server, and collected boxes of financial and complaint records. Another team interviewed us at the cabin. Rachel sat beside me at the dining table and answered as a private citizen. She did not tell them what conclusions to reach. She did not describe Karen as unstable or malicious. She gave dates, documents, recordings, and names. When the lead investigator asked what outcome she wanted, Rachel considered the question. "I want the conduct to stop," she said. "I want the people harmed by it protected, and I want the system examined, so this cannot happen to the next resident who lacks my resources." That last sentence changed the investigation. The records showed that Karen's behavior had not begun with us. For 6 years, she had used the complaint process against residents who challenged her. An elderly widower had received 11 landscaping violations after opposing a fee increase. A young couple had been reported to Child Services after asking to see the HOA budget. The report was found baseless. A contractor had lost a community job after refusing to perform free work at Karen's house. 2 families had sold their homes after months of selective inspections and anonymous complaints. Karen had survived because each target believed he or she was alone. Greg, the treasurer, brought 3 storage boxes to the investigators. His hands shook as he set them down. "I should have done this years ago," he said. Inside were board minutes, emails, handwritten instructions, and expense records. Some showed Karen directing complaints from personal accounts. Others showed her pressuring board members to approve actions after the fact. The emergency key cabinet had been opened dozens of times without 2 signatures. Not every entry was improper. Enough of them were. By late afternoon, the association's independent attorney advised the board to suspend Karen pending the investigation. The vote was 6-1. Karen cast the only opposing vote. When the suspension notice was delivered, she stood on the clubhouse steps in front of a dozen residents. "This is a political attack," she said. "You are all being manipulated by people who want control." No one answered. That silence was different from the silence in the earlier meeting. It was no longer fear, it was withdrawal. Karen had built her authority from the attention of frightened people. Now, one by one, they stopped feeding it. She looked across the parking lot and saw Rachel standing beside me near the truck. For a moment, I expected Karen to shout. Instead, she walked toward us. The crowd parted. "You think you won," Karen said. Rachel's expression remained calm. "This was never a contest. You used the state against me. I removed the state from my control and gave investigators the evidence. You ruined my name." "No," Rachel said. "Your decisions reached people who were finally willing to record them." Karen looked around at the neighbors, watching from the clubhouse steps. Something in her face faltered. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the title was gone. The clipboard was only a board. The rules were only words. The power had always come from people agreeing to be afraid. She turned and walked to her Lexus. No one followed her. Suspension did not bring peace immediately. For 3 days, Karen sent emails to every address she possessed. She called the investigation a conspiracy, the board vote unlawful, and the residents ungrateful. She claimed Rachel intended to take control of Lake Pine and turn the community into a government compound. By the fourth day, most people had stopped responding. Then the packages began. The first was a small cardboard box left beside our mailbox without postage. Inside was a cheap plastic bird feeder and a note written in red ink. "You can watch the road. You cannot watch everything." The second package contained gardening gloves. The third held a bent wind chime. None contained anything physically dangerous, but each object seemed chosen to say the same thing. "I can still reach your home." Rachel placed every item in a clear evidence bag, photographed where it had been found, and called the assigned investigator. She did not speculate publicly about who had sent them. On the fifth morning, Vince Turner came to our porch. Vince lived 2 houses east of us. He was a quiet accountant in his early 60s who baked sourdough bread, wore the same brown jacket in every season, and apologized to furniture when he bumped into it. That morning, he looked ill. He handed Rachel a printed email. Someone had sent it to 3 of his clients, accusing him of taking money from elderly residents and altering tax returns. The message included a spreadsheet designed to look like proof. The numbers were false, but the damage had already begun. One client had canceled a meeting. Another had asked for records going back 10 years. "Why me?" Vince asked. Rachel read the pages carefully. "Did you speak to investigators?" He nodded. "I told them Karen asked me last year to change a date on an invoice. I refused. That is why." Vince sat on the porch step and covered his face. Rachel called the investigator, then helped Vince contact his professional insurer and preserve the original email headers. I made coffee none of us drank. Within hours, 2 more residents came forward with similar messages. Karen's last strategy was isolation. If she could make witnesses distrust one another, perhaps no one would feel safe enough to keep speaking. Rachel understood the answer before the rest of us did. "You do not fight isolation with more private meetings," she said. "You put the truth in daylight." That Saturday, she invited every resident to the old boat dock. It was not an official HOA meeting. There was no agenda, no podium, and no vote. People brought folding chairs, thermoses, and cautious expressions. Some stood at the edge of the crowd, as though they might leave at the first raised voice. Rachel stood on the lower dock step with the lake behind her. She did not mention her title. She began with the first notice Karen had handed her. Then she described the 911 call, the administrative complaints, the unlawful entry, the drone, and the investigation. She explained what was documented and what remained unproven. She refused to turn suspicion into fact. Then she invited others to speak. The elderly widower described receiving violation notices every week after questioning a special assessment. A mother of 2 explained how an anonymous complaint had frightened her family, even though it was dismissed. The contractor spoke about losing work. Vince showed the false spreadsheet sent to his clients. As each person talked, the shape of Karen's system became visible. She had not controlled the neighborhood through one dramatic act. She had controlled it by making every target feel alone, uncertain, and ashamed. She used forms, whispers, inspections, and threats of liability. She made reasonable people believe resistance would cost more than surrender. When the last resident finished, Rachel stepped forward again. "Removing one person is not the same as fixing what allowed that person to act," she said. "A system built on secrecy will eventually serve whoever is most willing to misuse it. If Lake Pine wants something better, it must be written into the structure." She proposed no candidate for president. She asked for no role. Instead, she suggested term limits, independent annual audits, open financial records, a documented appeals process, 2-person approval for emergency access, automatic notice to owners whenever a key was used, and penalties for knowingly false complaints. She recommended that enforcement decisions require more than one officer and that every resident be allowed to review the evidence against him or her. Greg stood near the back of the crowd. "We should have done this years ago," he said. Rachel looked at him. "Then do it now." A petition circulated that afternoon. 71 of 78 households signed it. The remaining 7 included 3 vacant properties, 2 owners traveling overseas, Karen's home, and 1 man who refused to sign anything without reading it for at least 30 days. The special membership meeting took place on Monday night. Karen was permitted to attend as a homeowner, but not to preside. She entered the clubhouse carrying a new binder and sat in the front row. No one asked her to move. No one needed to. The membership voted to remove the old board and adopt temporary safeguards until a full charter could be approved. Greg resigned as treasurer, then volunteered to assist the independent accountant reviewing the books. Linda agreed to serve on a short-term transition committee. Vince declined office but offered to teach residents how to read the financial statements. Rachel was nominated 3 times. She declined 3 times. "I did not come here to replace one center of power with another," she said. "I will advise the committee, but I will not lead it." Karen rose during public comment. Her voice was controlled, but the old certainty was gone. "You will regret dismantling the standards that protected this community." The elderly widower answered from the second row. "Standards did not frighten us, Karen. You did." No one applauded. The sentence did not need applause. Karen closed her binder and left. The public integrity investigation continued for 6 weeks. The county attorney charged Karen with making a false emergency report and unlawful entry, both handled without spectacle. The civil review documented repeated misuse of HOA processes, unauthorized key access, and retaliation against witnesses. The association filed its own claim to recover legal and investigative costs. Karen's attorneys eventually negotiated a consent agreement. She did not admit every allegation, but she accepted responsibility for the unauthorized entry, withdrew her accusations against the residents, agreed to pay restitution, and accepted a court order prohibiting her from serving as an officer, manager, compliance agent, or records custodian for any homeowners association in the state for 10 years. The order also required her to surrender every copied key, device, record, mailing list, and account credential connected to Lake Pine Estates. It should have ended there. 3 months later, Rachel was reviewing the new charter at our dining table when an email arrived from a resident in a small development 20 miles west of the lake. The woman had attended the dock meeting after hearing about it from a friend. She recognized a name on a flyer circulating in her neighborhood: Cassandra Pine Community Services. The flyer offered to organize a new homeowners association, establish compliance standards, and store order before property values decline. The registered organizer was K. Cassandra Pinebrook. Karen had reversed her first and middle names and presented herself as a consultant rather than an officer. I read the flyer over Rachel's shoulder. She found a technicality. She found what she believes is a technicality. Rachel did not contact Karen. She forwarded the flyer to the independent monitor, named in the consent agreement, and to Karen's attorney. The court reviewed whether organizing and controlling a board through a consulting company violated the order. It did. Karen's consulting registration was canceled. The 10-year restriction became permanent after the court found that she had deliberately attempted to evade it. The final order prohibited her from directing, advising, organizing, or exercising financial control over any common interest community under any variation of her name. There was no dramatic arrest. No crowd gathered. No camera captured her expression. A clerk entered the order on a quiet Thursday afternoon. That was enough. Real consequences rarely arrive with music. More often, they arrive as a signed page, a closed account, a surrendered key, or a door that no longer opens. Life at Lake Pine slowly became ordinary again. The key cabinet was replaced by an electronic system that notified owners whenever emergency access was requested. Financial reports were posted every quarter. Complaints required evidence and could no longer be filed anonymously except for genuine safety concerns. Board members served limited terms. Meetings ended on time. The greatest improvement was not written in any rule. Neighbors began speaking to one another before filing forms. When a fence leaned, someone offered a ladder. When music ran late, someone knocked on a door. When Vince's clients received corrections, from the investigator and his insurer. 3 neighbors hired him to handle their bookkeeping. The elderly widower joined the lake committee and spent most meetings arguing that fewer meetings were needed. Even Greg changed. He stopped treating silence as neutrality. At the first sign of selective enforcement under the new board, he raised his hand and asked the question he wished he had asked years earlier. Would we do the same thing if this resident were our friend? The answer ended the issue. Rachel kept her promise. She advised, but she did not lead. She helped draft rules, then stepped away. At work, she continued running the state police with the same restraint she had shown at the cabin. She never mentioned Karen in speeches. She never used the story to make herself look powerful. When younger officers heard about it and asked how she had remained calm, Rachel gave them the same answer. Calm is not the absence of anger. It is deciding that anger does not get to choose your next action. Months after the final order, we sat on the dock beneath a clear night sky. The lake was black glass around us. Crickets sang in the reeds. A porch light glowed across the water, small and steady. Rachel leaned against my shoulder. "Do you miss the quiet weekend we were supposed to have?" I asked. "We finally got it. It took half a year. You are impatient. I married a woman who files supporting documents for breakfast. Someone in this family has to be." She laughed then, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. I had not heard it often enough during those months. After a while, she looked back toward the cabin. The front door was closed. The curtains were open. No drone hovered beyond the glass. No headlights waited along the road. The old gray sweatshirt hung over the porch chair, exactly where she had left it. Karen believed power meant making people obey, Rachel said. That is why she could never understand what was happening. What was happening? People were learning they did not have to. The wind moved softly through the pines. I thought about the morning Karen called 911. She had shouted that Rachel was inside a house where she did not belong. She had expected uniforms to arrive, accept her story, and carry out her will. She believed official language would transform a lie into authority. Instead, the call created a record. The record led to evidence. The evidence gave frightened people courage. Their courage changed the system. Karen had tried to remove one woman from one home. In the end, she removed the fear that had kept an entire community silent. That was the part she never understood. Real strength is rarely the loudest voice at the door. It does not need a clipboard, a title, or a crowd watching. Real strength is patient enough to preserve the truth, disciplined enough to follow the rules even when it could bend them, and steady enough to stand beside people who have been made to feel alone. Rachel did not win because she commanded the state police. She won because, when Karen tried to turn power into a private weapon, Rachel refused to do the same. The lake remained quiet around us. The stars stretched across the water like a promise kept. For the first time since we had arrived, Rachel was not listening for tires on gravel or a phone ringing in the dark. She was simply home.